Hey guys, tonight we're heading into a part of the world that doesn't usually show up in airport brochures. We're climbing deep into the Caucasus Mountains, where Georgia, Russia, and Chechnya bump shoulders, and following the jagged path to the highland valleys where stone towers have stood watch for centuries. These aren't castles. They're not exactly forts either. They're something older, stranger, quieter. And the people who built them, they whispered to the wind like it was a neighbor or a god. Right now, you're standing at the edge of one of those valleys. The air is thinner than you expect. Not, I need an oxygen tank thin. Just thin enough that every breath reminds you you're somewhere other. The clouds don't really pass by here. They linger, get caught, on the peaks like laundry on a clothesline. Down in the valley, stone towers, lean, tall, square-jawed things, rise from the rocky soil like frozen smoke. Some are clustered in small groups. Others stand entirely alone. All of them look like they were built in a hurry, and yet have lasted 1,000 years. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your local time and where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far this little geography club stretches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking slowly down a slope, spongy with wild thyme. The scent hits you first. Clean, sharp, alpine. No sound except the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional flutter of a raven who seems suspicious of your presence. You spot your first tower up close. Its walls are made from limestone slabs, carefully fitted without mortar. It's 5 stories high, maybe more, but not wide, like a vertical shoebox turned into a fortress. You get the sense this thing could take a cannonball to the face and still say, yeah, and? This one has slits for windows, barely wide enough for a hand to slip through. They weren't built to let the sunshine in. They were made to keep arrows, or worse, out. And yet, there's an elegance to the construction. The stones aren't random. They've been chosen, shaped, laid with the kind of attention usually reserved for temples. The corners are slightly beveled. The top flares out just enough to remind you this was not just architecture. It was status, defense, and story all at once. Scientists still argue about when the first of these towers were built. Some say the 12th century. Others push it back as far as the 8th. The truth? These places are hard to date. Stone doesn't give up its secrets easily. And the local oral traditions are more poetic than chronological. One version claims the towers were built in a single night by men who promised the gods they'd never speak a lie again if their homes could reach the stars. Another insists they weren't built at all, but grew from the bones of the mountains themselves. What we do know, these towers, found especially in regions like Svaneti, Ingushetia, and Chechnya, served many purposes. Defense, sure, but also storage, ritual, emergency housing, and maybe a bit of family bragging rights. You didn't just build a tower because you needed one. You built a tower because your great-grandfather said it was time. Climbing into one now, you notice the air changes, cooler inside and hushed. Dust motes spiral in a single shaft of light like dancers who forgot the music. The stairs are terrifying, more like a series of steep ladders, sometimes set into the walls. You ascend slowly, feeling the wood creak under your weight. Everything smells of pine resin, dry stone, and the faintest trace of smoke. Someone lit a fire here, maybe this year, maybe 100 years ago. You reach the top and peer out a slit window. The view? Nothing but ridges, forests, and clouds drifting below you. It's like looking out of an airplane without the engine noise of the bag of pretzels. You imagine someone, maybe a shepherd or warrior or teenage lookout, once standing where you are, scanning the ridges for movement, for a horseman cresting a hill, for smoke that didn't belong. And here's where the weird part kicks in. Local lore says that if you stay too long at the top of a tower, you'll start to hear things. Voices in the wind, names you don't know, questions that have no answers. Some say it's the spirits of the tower's builders whispering old grievances. Others say it's just the altitude messing with your ears. You decide not to test the theory too thoroughly. You climb down slowly. Your legs ache in places you didn't know had muscles. But as soon as you step outside again, you feel something new. Not just awe, but familiarity. These towers, for all their mystery, don't feel alien. They feel like they belong to the land in the same way a tree or a cave does. They don't shout for attention. They simply are. A passing herder, a woman wrapped in layers of wool and dignity, nods to you as she guides her sheep along a narrow trail. She has no interest in explaining the towers. To her, they're like clouds or goats. Always there, occasionally annoying, but not in need of interpretation. Oh, and here's your fringe fact of the night. Some towers were believed to be blood towers, used in old revenge rituals. If a family member was killed and no justice was served, the avenger would climb the tower, light a small fire, and wait. The wind would carry the smoke and the message to the killer's valley. And if the killer didn't flee within 3 days, well, let's just say they'd wish they had. You keep walking. More towers emerge, scattered across the slopes like stone chess pieces in a game no one remembers the rules for. Some lean a little. Others are collapsed entirely, their stones now part of goat paths or garden walls. Still others stand immaculate, untouched, like they were built last week and not last millennium. The sun starts to sink behind a granite peak. The wind picks up, dry and playful, pushing your coat collar upward like a nosy child. You close your eyes for a second and swear you hear something. A whisper, a word you almost understand, or maybe just your brain, pulling tricks in the thin air. Whatever it is, the towers are listening. The woman with the sheep is gone now, swallowed by a fold in the hillside. You keep walking, skirting the edge of a stream that seems to have nowhere in particular to go. Ahead, the terrain opens into a wider basin. More towers here, clustered this time. Some grouped in little hamlets, others freestanding and proud, like lone sentinels guarding an invisible border. This is where you start to meet the people behind the towers, not the ones who built them. Those builders are long gone, tucked under stones or dust. But their descendants are very much alive, and they carry themselves like they're still building towers every morning before breakfast. You stop at a low house, half sunk into the hillside, with thick walls and an arched wooden door. There's a garden out front, a suspiciously tidy one, for a place where rocks outnumber vegetables. Inside, the host welcomes you without a word, just a gesture toward the bench and a tilt of the head that says, "Tea, yes?" The tea arrives in a chipped porcelain cup. It's black, slightly smoky, and accompanied by a sugar cube that you're meant to bite, not stir. On the wall, a faded photo shows a man standing next to a tower, probably the same one outside. He's holding a rifle in one hand and a string of onions in the other, multifunctional, like the towers themselves. The locals here aren't chatty in the way most cultures define it. They're not cold either, just efficient. A few words carry a lot of meaning. The tower is ours, your host says eventually. Not boastful, not possessive, just a statement of fact, like saying, that hill is green. Of course, the tower is theirs. Who else would it belong to? You walk the village path and meet more of the community. Most are herders, hunters, or farmers. But some are teachers, artists, medics. The younger ones split their time between milking cows and texting friends. Several speak Russian or Georgian, some a little English. A few speak only the ancestral tongue, an old dialect that sounds like wind combing through gravel. One older man, leaning on a walking stick, polished by decades of use, points to a tower on a ridge and says, "That one is Bega's, or was. He lost it in the big quarrel." When pressed, he smiles and waves the question away, as if to say, "You don't want to know, and I don't want to remember." Here's a fun twist. There are family towers, whole lineages tied to specific structures. A wedding? Happens in the tower. A funeral? Same place. A sheep goes missing? You talk about it in the tower. It's not just a building. It's a character in the family drama. You don't inherit land here, you inherit walls. And if those walls lean slightly to the left, well, so does your reputation. Geographers point out that most of these towers were built in tight proximity to one another, often within eyesight. The idea was both social and tactical. You see your neighbors, they see you, and if something catches fire or gallops in wearing armor, someone can sound the alarm. But anthropologists also note something deeper, a quiet competitiveness. No one wanted to be the family with no tower, or a short one. That's like having the only tent at Burning Man with no lights. So when one family built up, the others followed suit, like vertical dominoes of pride. Scientists still argue whether the towers were truly meant for sustained defense or just ceremonial flexing. Some argue they were never garrisoned at all. Too narrow, too drafty, too isolated. Others claim they were part of a full-blown tactical grid, capable of signaling across vast distances within minutes. Either way, they worked. The region remained notoriously unconquerable for centuries. Outsiders came. They did not stay. Back to the people. You meet a pair of teenage boys leading donkeys down a cliff path. One of them wears a Juventus jersey. The other has "no Wi-Fi, no worries" written across his hoodie. Both of them laugh when you ask if they live in the tower. Of course, one says. Where else? Their tower, it turns out, has a solar panel. Not because the ancestors predicted it, but because one of the cousins works in Tbilisi and brought it back. They charge phones, run a single bulb, even get a weak FM signal if the weather's right. One boy says his grandfather won't let them hang curtains because the tower must breathe. You let that one go. A fringe detail. Some towers were said to be need some die. Singing stones. Not literally musical, but placed in such a way that the wind creates harmonic tones as it whistles through cracks and vents. Locals say that on cold autumn nights, you can hear them hum. Scientists are, shockingly, still debating whether this is architectural genius or just a mountain's version of tinnitus. It's getting late. Smoke spirals from chimney holes and the smells change. Flatbread toasting, goat stew simmering, something deep fried that defies identification but smells divine. You're invited, no, expected, to join for dinner. Refusing would be like denying oxygen. Hospitality here isn't offered, it's applied directly, like a poultice. Inside the home, food comes fast and with no discussion. Bread first, always. then a strange, warm cheese, then soup, then dumplings, then something pickled, and maybe a shot of something sharp and berry-based. Your host pours. You don't ask questions. Someone says the towers were born of necessity, but raised on stubbornness. That feels about right. This isn't a land of abundance. It's a place where everything takes longer. Harvesting, building, trusting. And the towers reflect that. Hard-won, patient, practical, and proud. Before bed, you're shown to a guest room lined with tapestries. They're not just decoration. They insulate the walls and soften the silence. Out your small window, one last tower looms in the moonlight. You swear it looks taller than before. You listen for wind. It's still out there, slipping between valleys like a long-haired cat in a library. Whispering, always whispering. Morning arrives, not with a sunrise, but with a softening of the dark. The sky goes from black to graphite to a sort of half-hearted silver, and you feel the world stretching beneath you. You step outside, wrapped in borrowed wool, and take a deep breath. It's cold enough to nip your nose, but not enough to be cruel. A raven flaps low over the rooftops and disappears between two towers. The ground crunches underfoot with frost that hasn't yet decided whether to melt or dig in for the day. Today, you're going to learn how these towers were made. The first thing to understand is that nothing about this terrain makes building easy. The slopes are steep. The soil is stingy. Stones don't lie in tidy piles. They explode out of hillsides like bad-tempered teeth. And yet, the people here manage to erect multi-story towers, often more than 20 meters tall, using nothing but muscle, animal transport, and some extremely passive-aggressive physics. Your guide today is a compact, weather-hardened man in his 60s. He introduces himself with a name that sounds like it was invented by glaciers and consonants. He says simply, "We built this one," and points to a nearby tower with a narrow wooden ladder leading to the second floor. You resist the urge to ask, how many people died doing that? He laughs once, like a stone dropping into a well, and leads you around the base. The walls are made of local schist and limestone, some pieces the size of microwave ovens. The stones are carefully dressed, not smooth but flat and shaped to interlock. There's barely any visible mortar. That's because most towers used only minimal binding agents, some a bit of lime-based mortar, others clay or ash, and still others nothing at all, just sheer precision. Mainstream geographers marvel at how towers in such seismically unstable regions have survived centuries of earthquakes. And they have. Some of these towers have shrugged off more tremors than a Hollywood marriage. Their secret? A subtle inward tapering of the walls. Each story is slightly narrower than the one below, creating a pyramid-like stability without actually looking like a pyramid. Think Jenga, but made by someone with trust issues and a talent for geometry. You climb inside one tower that's mid-restoration. A scaffolding of questionable loyalty hugs one side, and goats chew grass like unpaid interns below. The floor plan is tight, maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, but stretches upward like a stone chimney. Ladders connect the levels, and in some cases, internal ledges double as shelves or sleeping platforms. Curiously, the ground floor often has no door. You're meant to enter from the second level via a wooden ladder or external stairs, which could be pulled up in times of danger. Practical, yes, but also a real buzzkill if you forgot your keys. One mainstream debate concerns the orientation of these towers. Many face the prevailing wind, which makes sense if you want to harness it as a defense mechanism. No, not like a wind-powered cannon, but imagine sound. Wind blowing across slit windows or channeled holes creates eerie, whining noises, enough to scare superstitious raiders, or, at the very least, annoy them into leaving. There's also evidence that certain towers align with solar events, solstices, equinoxes, specific star risings. Scientists still argue whether that was intentional or just architectural serendipity. But one thing's clear. These builders weren't just stacking rocks and hoping for the best. They understood mass, weight, light, wind, and time. Your guide hands you a palm-sized stone with a carved spiral on it. Decoration, he says, then shakes his head. Or not. Some of these etchings, found embedded in walls or floor slabs, are geometric. Spirals, triangles, stars. Others are animalistic. Wolves, falcons, wild goats. A few depict human figures, but only in abstract, almost alien forms. One looks like a man with no mouth. Fringe theorists claim the towers were not just homes or fortresses, but energy vessels. They suggest the shape, materials, and placement harnessed some kind of electromagnetic force, like mountain acupuncture. Mainstream archaeologists, predictably, roll their eyes hard enough to cause whiplash. Still, it's hard to deny that some towers feel different. Colder, quieter, hungrier. Outside, you walk around one of the oldest towers in the valley. The stones have gone soft with moss, and vines crawl up its shadowed side like they're trying to remember something. A local child tells you it's cursed. Nobody sleeps inside. The wind doesn't blow near it anymore. You raise an eyebrow. The child shrugs. It watches. You make a note not to sleep near that one. Back at your host's home, someone's baking bread in a clay oven called a tone. The smell is pure comfort, earthy, yeasty, with a faint smokiness that makes you momentarily forget that you haven't showered in 2 days and may never again. You sit with a few villagers who speak enough English to entertain your questions. One tells you that building a tower was a sacred act. You had to ask permission from the wind and the land, she says. If you didn't, it would fall before it finished. She says this casually, while slicing goat cheese with a knife the size of your forearm. Later, you're shown a stack of old tools, rusted chisels, wooden levels, stone hammers. Primitive by modern standards, but deadly effective. We used to break stone with stone, your host says, or fire and water. Heat the stone, then pour cold water on it. It cracks like glass. Imagine doing that thousands of times with frost-bitten fingers at altitude while watching your livestock try to escape into a ravine. By now, the day is ending again. You're standing near a tower as the sky deepens to blue-black. The wind starts up again, threading its way through the valleys like it's late for an appointment. You hear a faint sound, almost like whistling, but not quite. The guide looks up and smiles. That tower, he says, has a voice. And it does. Just a single note. Low, continuous, like a warning that doesn't want to panic anyone. You wonder if the builders meant for that to happen, or if the tower simply learned to sing over the centuries. Maybe both. Either way, it's music now. You head back to your room, and as you fall asleep, you imagine the stones above and below you humming softly, stacked in perfect tension, older than empires, You wake to wind. Not a howl, not a gust. Just a steady, low murmur brushing against the walls of your room. The kind of sound that feels intentional. Not weather, but communication. You pull on your boots and step outside where the morning light is pale and watery, still stretching its fingers over the ridge. Today, you're following the whispers. Down the valley, you meet a wiry man named Timur. He carries a goat hide satchel, a small curved horn, and the look of someone who could find his way home blindfolded. Timur, it turns out, is a kind of wind guide, a man who knows how the towers used to speak to one another. He takes you up a narrow trail, past grazing horses and outcrops where hawks ride thermals like they've paid for the privilege. Behind you, the clustered towers shrink, and in front of you, the ridgeline opens like a book left in the sun too long. Timur stops at a ledge where two towers face each other across the valley. Between them lies a gulf of air, perhaps a kilometer wide. He takes out his horn, curved and polished smooth from years of use, and blows. The sound that comes out is not musical. It's sharp, brief, echoing like a stone dropped down a well. Across the gap, a shape stirs. A figure appears at the window of the other tower. They raise an arm in response. No phone, no radio, just horn and wind and line of sight. This, Timur explains, was how the towers talked. Before electricity, before roads, before alphabets even. A system of sound and signal. Horn blasts, smoke curls, flag flashes. Each message had a meaning. Strangers approaching. Wolves near the herds. A wedding tomorrow. Enemy spotted, lock your doors. The towers weren't just stone. They were servers. Mainstream historians call this a proto-network defense grid. Though you get the sense that sounds more complicated than it really was. Timur says simply, the valley never sleeps, so we stay awake. But here's where it gets strange. You hike farther up with Timur until you reach an old, half-collapsed tower. No one lives here anymore. The roof is gone, and the lower stones have started to lean. And yet, when the wind rises just right, the tower moans. Not a whistle, not a creak, a voice. Deep and reedy and distinctly unmechanical. You tilt your head. Timur shrugs. It says what it wants. Some people hear warnings. Some hear prayers. He pauses. Some hear family. Scientists still argue about this phenomenon. Some say the hollows in the stones create natural wind tunnels, amplifying certain frequencies. Others suspect a placebo effect, people hearing what they expect to hear. And then there are the fringe theorists who insist the towers were tuned like instruments, that each one had its own note, its own song. You sit in the grass, listening. The wind surges and drops, changing tone as it moves through the tower's broken crown. One moment, it sounds like humming. The next, like someone sighing a name. Your spine tingles. You don't want to believe it's haunted, but you also don't want to believe it isn't. As you hike down, Timur tells you stories. There was once a woman who could mimic any horn signal from any tower. They called her the Echo. She was blind from birth, but they say she knew the hills better than any map maker. During one brutal winter, when wolves were thick and food thin, she relayed horn codes across 7 valleys without missing a beat. No one ever caught her making a mistake. Some believed the wind told her what to say. He grins. She married a shepherd with no tongue. They never fought once. You both stop to drink from a narrow spring. It runs ice cold over the rocks, and moss clings to the banks like green velvet. Above, a hawk makes a lazy circle in the sky. The wind shifts again, brisker now, less friendly. Timur puts his hand to the ground. "Storm in the east," he says. "It'll be here by night." You ask how he knows. He points to a distant tower. A wisp of smoke curls from its top window. Not a cooking fire, but a signal. "They've lit the warning," he says. "Old habit. We still do it, even though we have phones now. Just in case." Just in case the wind stops carrying messages. Just in case the satellites go silent. Just in case the old ways remember something the new ones forgot. You descend to the village under thickening clouds. Everyone's moving a little faster now, herding animals into shelter, securing shutters, pulling up ladders from their tower entrances. The air buzzes like static just before a lightning strike. Here's a fringe fact. In some valleys, wind was believed to be a living thing. Not just air, but presence. You didn't insult it. You didn't speak its name without cause. Children were taught to greet the wind when it passed and to offer it a pinch of flour on particularly gusty days. One family, Timur says, used to hang copper bells from their tower windows, not for decoration, but to keep the wind entertained. If the bells stopped ringing, it meant the wind had gone angry or bored. Back in your room, the storm arrives. Not loud, just persistent. Rain drums gently on the stone ledge outside your window. Somewhere above, the wind is pushing past the towers like a tired traveler trying to remember where it lives. You lie back and try to imagine what it was like centuries ago, when the only way to know your cousin 2 ridges over was still alive was to hear a single clear horn note through the fog. How your breath would catch if the wind brought nothing at all. Silence was the scariest signal. Even now, locals say that sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is sharp and high, you can hear messages between towers that haven't been lived in for hundreds of years. Just faint sounds, words too garbled to recognize, but not random. You ask Timur, as you drift toward sleep, if he's ever heard one of those messages himself. He smiles. "Every tower has a memory," he says. "Some just take longer to speak." And somewhere outside, the wind exhales. By now, you've stopped trying to check the time. Watches feel unnecessary in a place where the sun, wind, and towers tell you everything you need to know. The rhythm of this valley has seeped into your bones, slow, deliberate, humming beneath the surface like a half-forgotten melody. Today, you're stepping inside one of the towers, not just ducking through a doorway, but entering properly, as a guest. Your host this time is a grandmother named Maka. Her back is straight as a rifle barrel, her eyes sharp as broken flint. She leads you toward a family tower with no ceremony, just a nod and a muttered, "You come. Take care not to hit your head." You do anyway. The door frame is low, built for defense, not for comfort. Inside, it's darker than you expect. The only light comes from a small window slit, 2 stories above, and from the fire flickering in a stone basin near the wall. There's no chimney, just a smoke hole in the ceiling. The air is thick, but not choking. The smoke rises with a kind of lazy grace threading itself between the wooden beams. Your boots click against the stone floor, which has been worn smooth over centuries. There are no furnishings in the modern sense. A wooden bench, a few blankets, dried herbs hanging from pegs in the walls. It smells like pine, smoke, and sheep's wool, cozy and ancient. You feel as though you've stepped not into a room, but into a pause between centuries. Maka gestures toward a wooden shelf in the wall and says something that might translate to, "Don't touch that. It's older than you by 3 lifetimes. You oblige." The shelf holds a small collection of carved tokens, horn tips, dried flowers, something that looks suspiciously like a bird's foot, and a few items that might be family talismans or just things no one ever threw away. Here's something charming. These towers often had a ritual corner. Not quite a shrine, but a designated nook for offerings and protective symbols. A tuft of wool, a cup of milk, a carved sunstone. Fringe beliefs suggest that this was where spirits entered the tower. Benevolent ancestors, protective wind beings, even the occasional mountain demon, who, with the right bribe, might become helpful. One of the oldest items in Maka's corner is a battered copper mirror. When asked, she says it belonged to her great-grandmother, who watched the wind in it. You're not sure if that's poetic or literal, and you decide not to press. You climb to the second level via a narrow wooden stair. Really, more a ladder with opinions. Up here, the room is a little brighter. This was once the living space where people would cook, eat, and sleep when they couldn't be in their homes during times of danger. A central hearth pit is blackened from centuries of use, though there's no fire now. Maka points to the walls, where faint marks are scratched into the stone. Some in patterns, others in straight vertical lines. Births, she says, and storms, and how many goats died. A family record etched into rock, because paper burns and memory fades. One line, she says, was made after her uncle survived a fall from the 3rd floor. He hit every step on the way down. We still tell that story when children misbehave. Scientists still argue about how often these towers were actually inhabited. Some say they were used only during raids or harsh winters. Others believe some families practically lived in them full-time. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The tower was both refuge and reminder, a vertical declaration that your people had endured, were enduring, and intended to continue enduring. Thank you very much. You climb again. The 3rd level feels more austere, less personal. This was likely the storage area. Grain sacks, salted meat, tools. Some towers had secret cubbyholes in the walls, accessed by sliding a loose stone. Maka shows you one. It holds a rusted knife, a coil of twine, and a little cloth pouch. She doesn't open the pouch. Neither do you. Wind whistles faintly through the window slits. You pause to listen. It's like someone humming a lullaby they barely remember, and you begin to understand why people once believed these towers were alive. At the top, finally, you emerge into the tower's crown. There's no roof, just sky. The view is a full 360 degrees of mountains, valleys, and nothing resembling a city. You imagine a lookout posted here during a storm, eyes scanning the ridges, listening for horn blasts, watching for enemy silhouettes against the sky. This is where Maka lights a small butter lamp. Not for you, just a routine act, like stretching your back after standing up too long. She mutters a few words in the old tongue, then turns to you and says, "Now the wind knows your name." That's not ominous at all. You descend slowly. Back at ground level, Maka offers a bowl of warm goat's milk and a thick slice of barley bread. You sit on a low bench near the fire and take your time eating. Nothing here happens in a rush, not speech, not food, not memory. You ask if she ever considered moving to the city. She laughs once, like a door creaking open. To live where the walls don't listen? No, I would go deaf. Here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some towers were intentionally built with listening stones, smooth, polished slabs placed in walls that amplified sound. Whisper near one, and it could be heard from the other end of the floor. Spying? Maybe. Sacred acoustics? Possibly. Kids using it to mess with their siblings in the middle of the night? Almost certainly. By late afternoon, you're outside again, walking the narrow path down from the tower. A group of children play nearby, weaving between the stones, yelling nonsense and laughing. One girl climbs halfway up the exterior stairs of her family's tower, then shouts, "The wind is awake." Everyone scatters. It's a game, but not entirely. You look back once more. Maka stands in her tower doorway, her silhouette framed by smoke and shadow. She raises a hand, not to wave, but as if pressing something into the air. A pause, a seal, a quiet goodbye. And just like that, the door closes. The path away from Maka's tower is lined with cairns, small stacks of stones, deliberately placed. Some are squat and round, others tall and teetering. Each one whispers a quiet message. Someone passed here. Someone remembered. You add a pebble to one without thinking. It just feels right. You're heading toward a part of the valley where the towers grow thinner, and the land opens into a steep, craggy slope, known locally as the Steppe of Ash. According to your guide, whose name today is Zaur, and whose face looks like it was carved from the same granite as the cliffs, this place remembers things, bad things. It was one of the first valleys to face outside invaders. You crest the hill, and suddenly, it's obvious. The towers here look different, heavier, shorter. Their tops are jagged, broken, not by time, but by force. Scars, not aging. You walk among the ruins quietly, like entering a battlefield long after the last scream has faded. Zaur squats beside a tower split down the middle like a broken tooth. This one fell during the last invasion, he says. Not the big one, the other big one. He means the 18th century incursions, or maybe the 19th. It's hard to tell. Around here, the invasion is a fluid term. Everyone has a different one in mind. Invaders came from all directions over the centuries. Mongols from the east, Persians from the south, Tsarist armies from the north, Soviets later, with maps and questions and guns. But the towers, they held. At least most of them. These weren't castles in the traditional sense. No drawbridges, no moats, no dungeons. Just lean, stubborn structures built for retreat and resistance. When enemies came, families climbed into their towers, pulled up the ladders, and waited. Days, weeks, until the attackers gave up or froze or wandered into a goat hole. And yet, not all towers survived. Zaur gestures toward a pile of stones and splintered beams. This one burned. They used oil. Fire climbed fast. You can almost hear it. The hiss of wood, the pop of resin in the beams, the roar of something proud crumbling into ash. Scientists still debate just how effective these towers were as military defenses. Some argue they were never designed for prolonged sieges. No cisterns, no real escape routes. Others claim they work precisely because they were never intended to win, just to slow, to delay, to make conquest so irritating that it wasn't worth the effort. You stop at a tower still standing, though lopsided. Its lower stones are blackened. Zaur opens a small side entrance and beckons you inside. It's cold. The interior bears the marks of violence. scorched beams, arrowheads embedded in the stone, a wall crack that runs the height of the room. And yet, someone has left fresh flowers at the hearth. Mountain poppies. You don't ask who. You know better now. Fringe legends say that certain towers could close themselves during invasion, shifting stones, locking doors without touch. It's the kind of tale that makes architects sigh and folklorists grin. Zor won't confirm or deny it. He just says, some towers did not fall because they did not want to. The tower names themselves tell stories. One was called the Breathless One. Another, where the arrow returned. You don't ask what that means. You just write it down, a little shiver running up your spine. You sit for a while on the tower's top floor, looking out over the valley. In the distance, another tower rises. This one pristine, its stones clean, its roof intact. Zor tells you that one was rebuilt in the 1990s by descendants of the original family. It took them 10 summers. Every stone was carried by hand. No machines, just memory. And here's the kicker, no blueprint. They rebuilt it from stories, from what the elders remembered, from dreams even. One man claimed his grandmother visited him in sleep to correct the window placement. They changed it the next day. As you descend, you spot an engraving near the door. It's faded, but still legible. A falcon, wings outstretched, and a tiny crescent moon above it. They say that one could fly, Zor says. You're not sure if he means the tower, the falcon, or the person who carved it. Again, you don't ask. The trail leads through a narrow pass where the wind is stronger, more focused. It screams between the rocks, echoing off the stone walls with such force that you instinctively duck. Zor laughs. Now you know why they built thick doors. Mainstream geography notes that these valleys were naturally defensible. High altitude, few passable roads, treacherous terrain. But the people didn't rely on geography alone. They engineered their resistance. From the angles of tower windows designed for optimal line of sight to horn communication systems with over 40 coded calls, the entire landscape was a network of survival. And still, invaders kept coming. One story Zor shares. During a Russian campaign, a soldier tried to climb into a tower using a grappling hook. He made it halfway before the villagers dropped a boiling pot of shemika, a sort of fermented yogurt soup, onto him. He fell, broke his leg. The villagers captured him, nursed him back to health, and then politely asked him to leave. He did. He also left his grappling hook behind. It's still there, rusted and mounted like a trophy. At the edge of the ridge, you find a small stone altar, unmarked, wind-worn. Zaur lights a match and leaves a crumb of bread. For the fallen, he says, and for those who still stand. You spend a quiet moment there, listening. The wind is calmer now, more solemn. You think about what it means to build something not just to last, but to outlast. Not just enemies, but neglect. Time, forgetting. As night falls, the towers around you seem to grow taller, like shadows stretching their legs. Some of them wear scars. Some are ghosts. But all of them endured. And so did the people who whispered to winds. You've been walking for hours now, and the trail has long since stopped pretending to be polite. It narrows into a rocky ribbon between two steep inclines, sometimes disappearing entirely under wild grass or the occasional goat with boundary issues. But ahead, there it is, a tower that locals call Uaska Court, which roughly translates to the listening one. It's said to be one of the oldest towers in the region, though no one agrees on the exact age. Some say it predates recorded history. Others believe it was built in one single night during a solar eclipse. A fringe theory? It was lowered from the sky by something that didn't need permission. You decide to go with the first option, for now. What makes this tower different isn't size, shape, or age. It's the symbols, hundreds of them, etched into the lintels, corners, and stairwells. Spirals, claw marks, crossed lines, even faint faces. Some are barely more than scratches. Others are deeply carved, arranged in patterns that feel too deliberate to be random. Zaur, who's still trudging alongside you, like he's part mountain goat, says, "This one is heavy with memory." You step inside. Immediately, the air feels different. Colder, but not from lack of sunlight. More like walking into a museum that hasn't let go of its exhibits. There's no furniture here, just the stone. Every surface holds a mark. Along one beam, a row of small teeth is embedded. Human? Goat? You don't ask. You're not sure you want to know. Your fingers trace a carved symbol near the door. 2 arrows forming a loop. Zaur taps it and says, "This means a no return." He shrugs. Could be a warning. Could be a joke. Some carvings are geometrical, concentric diamonds, or overlapping circles. Others are clearly narrative. A hunter and a deer. A sun surrounded by birds. What looks like a man falling from a great height with wings that are burning. Scientists still argue whether these marks are a language or just a family's doodles. Linguists from various countries have tried to categorize them, assign meaning, link them to other alphabets. No consensus. Some locals believe the symbols weren't meant to be read, they were meant to remind. Of what, you ask? Zaur says, of what happens when you forget? Charming. As you move upward, you notice small alcoves carved into the walls. Many are empty. A few still hold bundles, wrapped in cloth, bound with red string. No one touches these. Zaur calls them bindings. Sometimes they're meant to seal in a memory, sometimes a curse. Either way, best left alone. A shaft of sunlight breaks through the top window, illuminating a carving that was invisible moments ago. A handprint, small, child-sized, etched deeply into the wall. Beneath it, 7 dots in a circle. For the dead who never had names, Zaur says, then adds, or for the ones who came back without voices. You start to realize this tower isn't haunted, it's just aware. There's a popular belief in the region that towers like this were built with guidance, not from gods exactly, but from something older, the wind, perhaps, or the mountains themselves. One story tells of a builder who dreamed of a tower for 7 nights straight. On the 8th night, he started to build it exactly as he saw it. No plan, no sketches, just memory. It stood for 600 years and then collapsed during a clear, windless day. The cause? Unknown. The locals say it was because someone spoke carelessly near the cornerstone. You tuck that detail away for the next time someone complains about building codes. Back outside, Zaur points out something unusual. A trail of symbols leading down the side of the tower, not up, like a story told in reverse. He traces it with his finger. First a falcon, then a coiled snake, then what might be a rising sun, but drawn upside down. The descent, he says. This one tells how someone left the tower and didn't make it home. Or maybe they did, but they weren't the same. You're beginning to understand why these towers weren't just homes or watchposts. They were mnemonic devices. grief containers, celebration journals. They held not just people, but entire lifelines. No need for bookshelves. Just carve your story into the wall and let the wind read it later. Here's your mainstream fact of the day. Genetic studies have shown remarkable continuity in some of the mountain populations here, meaning many of the families living near these towers are directly descended from the original builders, going back nearly a millennium. In other words, when you see a child running barefoot past a tower, they might be the 40th generation to do exactly that. You sit at the base of the listening one, watching the shadows shift as clouds drift overhead. The tower seems taller now than it did an hour ago, as if, in sharing its secrets, it has regained some of its old stature. Fringe belief holds that the towers were once part of a constellation, that each one reflected a star. When you stood atop all of them in sequence, if you could survive the climb, you'd have a complete map of the heavens. Some still try this. There are mountain climbers, cartographers, mystics who come here every year, tracking the path like it's a pilgrimage. Some finish, others don't. The towers don't judge either way. Back in the village that evening, you share what you saw with a few elders. One woman nods slowly and says, "Those who carve remember. Those who don't, the tower will speak for them." A fire crackles in the hearth. Bread toasts on hot stones. Someone's making tea thick enough to stand a spoon in. You look out the window, back toward the ridge. The listening one is silhouetted against the last light of day. And for just a moment, you swear it shifts ever so slightly, like it's leaning forward. As if to hear you better, the wind is back tonight. Not as a whisper, not as a warning, but as a steady, wordless presence sliding down the slopes, brushing past the eaves and curling through the narrow tower windows like an old friend slipping in uninvited. You lie awake for a while, just listening. Somewhere outside, a dog barks once and goes silent. The mountains feel like they're holding their breath. In the morning, you're traveling with a woman named Shayna. She's tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in layered wool, and radiates a quiet authority that doesn't require explanation. "We go high today," she says, handing you a walking stick. No complaining. You don't dare. The trail is steeper than any before, zigzagging across scree-covered inclines and through pine groves that whisper among themselves. Shauna moves with the confidence of someone who has walked this path since before her legs knew what walking was. Eventually, you crest a narrow pass, and there, tucked against the curve of a cliff, is a wide plateau dotted with animal pens, drying racks, and 3 stone towers in a triangle. "This is where the women watched the sky," she says simply. This was a sky tending station, a seasonal home for women who managed livestock, preserved food, healed wounds, and crucially, read the signs of the clouds. While the men were off trading, hunting, or more often, arguing over territory, the women kept the village alive. They didn't just survive the mountains, they negotiated with them. Inside one of the towers, you find things that feel surprisingly domestic. Spools of thread, clay pots for yogurt, ladles carved from birch, and in the corners, scrolls, wrapped in goat leather and marked with faded pigment. "Not writing," Shauna says. "Weather songs." She unrolls one gently. Symbols, wavy lines, dots, leaf shapes, stretch across the hide in looping spiral patterns. "My great-grandmother could sing these," she adds. The wind would answer, or so she said. Scientists still argue about what these weather songs actually recorded? Were they meteorological logs, ritual chants, early cartography? The leading theory is that they were an intuitive mix, part observation, part poetry, part prayer. Modern meteorologists would likely roll their eyes, but locals will tell you the wind listens to rhythm more than reason. You help her gather dried juniper branches into bundles. She lights one and wafts the smoke toward each tower in turn, murmuring a phrase that sounds like it has more vowels than should be allowed in one sentence. To keep the old seasons from forgetting us, she explains. Over tea, you learn that these stations, scattered throughout the highlands, were the epicenters of knowledge, not just labor. The women here tracked bird migrations, cloud shapes, the flowering of certain herbs. They passed this data through story, song, and tiny carvings on wooden tablets called ushkara. One tablet shows a fox walking backward beneath a waning moon. Shauna points to it and says, "That means snow will return after 3 days of warmth." You laugh. She does not. There's a fringe belief, still whispered, never shouted, that the sky tenders could influence weather through the movement. A certain dance, if performed at the correct time of year and in the right tower, could delay a storm or hasten rainfall. My cousin tried it once, Shayna says with a rare smirk. The sheep scattered, and he sprained his ankle. But the next morning, we had snow. Coincidence? Maybe. But here, coincidence wears robes of purpose and carries an old carved stick. You wander through the pens, many still in use. Sheep graze lazily in the sun. Bells chime softly from their necks. A hawk circles overhead, and one of the women casually tosses a pebble skyward, not to scare it, just to say hello. Back in the second tower, you find something unexpected. A woven tapestry, nearly 4 meters long. It stretches the length of the inner wall, secured with wooden pegs and age-softened string. It depicts a tower, not this one, but one much taller, wrapped in stars. Around it, swirling shapes that could be clouds or voices. Each woman adds to it, Shayna says, one line every spring. Some lines are intricate, almost professional. Others are clumsy, but heartfelt. One is just a single red dot. You wonder what story it tells. Maybe all of them. Mainstream historians often overlook the role of women in tower society. The focus is usually on defense, warfare, horn signals, and blood feuds. But dig deeper, literally, into the layers of soot and bone, and a clearer picture emerges. Women ran the rhythms. They managed harvests. They preserved seeds. They diagnosed illnesses by taste and shadow. They named the winds. Oh yes, the winds had names. Not just directions, personalities. There was Korchala, the jealous wind. It blew in from the east, bringing snow when the lambs were due. There was Izara, the warm wind with a sharp tongue, welcomed in spring, feared in autumn. And then Vernuk, the quiet wind. If you couldn't hear it, that meant it was listening to you. You sit with the women of the sky station in the fading light, drinking something that tastes like mint and lightning. They talk among themselves in half whispers and full laughter, nodding toward the towers as if they were also part of the conversation. At one point, a girl no older than 6 steps out and sings into the wind, just a single line, tuneless and brave. The wind responds with a puff that lifts her braids. She grins like she just won the universe. Later, Shayna shows you her family's ledger, not on paper, but on a carved stick. Each notch, curve, and hole denotes something: a birth, a lost goat, a heavy snow. She holds it like a diary. You ask if she'll ever write it down. She taps her temple. It's written here. This just helps it stay. You lie down on a stone ledge, staring up at the stars. They flicker coldly, disinterested in your presence. Somewhere nearby, a tower creaks in the settling air. The women are humming now, not a melody you recognize, but one that feels like it was always there, under your skin, in your bones, waiting. And as sleep reaches for you, the wind returns. Not fierce, not playful, just knowing. By now, you can tell the wind apart. The morning gust that comes from the north and smells like melted ice, that's just weather. But the dry breeze that slides sideways through the valley at twilight, making the tower doors creak and the dogs lift their heads in silence, that's something else entirely. That's the wind. You're starting to understand what the locals mean when they say, the wind remembers. Today, you're walking with a man named Eldar, though he jokes that the wind calls him old bones. He's a wiry grandfather, with hands like saddle leather, and the sense of humor of someone who has lived through avalanches, blizzards, a border war, and at least one attempted goat theft. You'll like this valley, he says. The wind tells the truth here, usually. The path takes you across a ridge and down into a more exposed stretch of land, where towers stand farther apart. Here, Eldar says, we listen more than we speak, and you soon realize what he means. It's a place where sound behaves differently. Whispers carry. Footsteps echo twice. Even your heartbeat seems to reverberate in the air like a soft drum. He pauses near a hollow tree and points to the tower at the far end of the valley. It's a strange one. Its top is twisted, like it spun slightly during construction. Its windows face not outward, but toward each other, as though the tower is listening to itself. This is where the wind judges used to live, Eldar says. The what now? Turns out, every few valleys had at least one family of wind interpreters. They weren't shamans, exactly, or priests, or even elders in the traditional sense. Their job was to understand the wind, how it moved, what it carried, and what it meant. The wind tells everything, Eldar says. If someone's lying, if an animal will die, if a storm will come before it's ready. You ask how they heard it. He shrugs. Practice. And good ears. He tells you about his aunt, who used to sit for hours on the top floor of their tower, back straight, eyes closed. She would hum, just low and steady, and when the wind changed pitch, she would stop. Then say something like, rats in the grain house. 3. And there they'd be. Mainstream science, unsurprisingly, does not recognize wind divination as a legitimate forecasting tool. Most meteorologists chalk it up to a mix of atmospheric pressure shifts, intuition, and good old-fashioned guesswork. But you've now heard 4 separate people describe how a woman once told an avalanche was coming because the wind stopped blinking. No one has figured out what that means. Fringe believers claim that wind interpreters could even use breath as a kind of offering, blowing into bottles, jars, or hollow bones, and sealing them during different times of day. These wind captures were kept for future rituals or opened during droughts. One tale tells of a jar buried beneath a tower that, when opened during a particularly dry summer, released a gust strong enough to collapse a fence and flatten 2 chickens. Eldar just laughs. That one's probably true. The chickens deserved it. As you near the twisted tower, he warns you to step lightly. Not because of spirits, he says, because of echoes. They go places. Inside, the air feels unsettled, not hostile, just restless, like the walls are stretching. The tower has no roof now, just a crown of broken stones and tufts of moss. Wind curls down through the shaft in steady pulses, like breathing. You climb slowly, careful with each step. On the top level, Eldar produces a flat stone from his coat. It's pierced with small holes and etched with a swirling pattern. He places it carefully in the middle of the floor, then sits cross-legged beside it. This, he says, is a wind eye. You sit opposite. For a while, neither of you speaks. The wind starts to rise, first as a breeze, then as a long, low draft that moves around the room like a cautious animal. It finds the stone and begins to whistle through the holes, each one producing a different note. Not music exactly, more like a code. Eldar listens, tilts his head. She says the snow will come early this year, he murmurs. She also says you have questions, but you already know the answers. Oh, cool. Thanks, Wind. You don't push it. Just sit there, letting the sound work its way into you. It's oddly hypnotic. The notes shift with the breeze, repeating in patterns that might just be your mind trying to assign meaning. Or maybe not. Scientists still argue over whether these so-called wind eyes had any real function beyond accidental whistling. Some say they were toys. Others think they were wind measuring tools. A few suspect they were part of a larger spiritual framework, an attempt to give the invisible a voice. Outside, the wind changes again, sharper now, with a sudden upward push. Eldar looks up and mutters, "She's impatient today." As you descend, he tells one last story. There was once a tower built entirely of stones taken from other towers, gathered after a war, assembled by a man who had lost his entire family. He said he wanted a tower that remembered everything, Eldar says, so he could forget. The wind never spoke there, not a whisper, not even a sigh. After a year, the man moved away. The tower still stands, but the locals call it the Silent One. You walk past it later, it feels off, like something with its back turned. That night, back in the village, the wind howls. Not violently, just loud enough that it drowns out conversation. Eldar nods toward the mountains and says, "That's the wind arguing with herself." You fall asleep to her argument, soft vowels, sharp consonants, rising and falling with the rhythm of the towers. And just before you drift off, you realize something. The towers aren't silent. They're just waiting for someone who knows how to listen. This morning, the valley is still, eerily still. Even the sheep seem subdued, clustered in silence under the eaves of stone barns. The wind, for once, is not whispering. It's hiding. You're walking with a young man named Aslan. He's tall, baby-faced, and carries a worn leather satchel with a wooden flute sticking out of the side. Today, he says, we visit the Feud Towers. You pause. Feud Towers? He grins. Oh yes, the fun kind. The path takes you to a gorge cut deep into the earth, flanked by two opposing cliffs. Atop each cliff stands a stone tower, leaning slightly toward the other, like old men mid-argument. These towers, Aslan explains, belong to two families who once hated each other so much they built their homes in direct line of sight, just to glare properly. 400 years they fought, he says, over land, pride, and cheese. You think he's joking, he is not. The story goes like this. One family accused the other of stealing a prized wheel of aged mountain cheese. Accusations flew. A goat was kidnapped in retaliation. A cart of firewood mysteriously caught fire. One side supposedly painted their tower door red, an ancient insult meaning your ancestors were weaklings. The other responded by hanging strips of dried fish upside down from their windows, which, in case you're wondering, means we spit on your hospitality. And so it began. Scientists still argue about the actual causes of these feuds: land disputes, clan rivalries, economic pressure. But in this case, the feud became its own tradition. Generations were born into it like a seasonal allergy. Kids learned to scowl across the valley before they could walk. Weddings were delayed or forbidden. Even the dogs knew not to cross the footbridge. And yet, neither tower ever fell. They endured sieges, storms, and spite. The two families fortified their homes, dug trenches, and created elaborate pulley systems to hoist up supplies when venturing outside became too risky. Aslan shows you a rusted bell nailed to a tree stump. This was the neutral zone, he expounds. A tub where messages were exchanged, or insults, or cheese, funnily enough. You sit near the edge of the gorge, gazing at the towers. Their mirror images, same height, same shape, same stubborn refusal to crumble. Each has a slit window directly facing the other. You can't help but imagine two figures, centuries ago, standing in those windows in total silence, breathing heavily and clenching their teeth. And here's the best part. No one remembers who actually stole the cheese. At some point in the 19th century, after wars and famines and a particularly messy avalanche, the younger generation started ignoring the feud altogether. The elders kept shouting, but no one listened, Aslan says. Eventually, they died, and the towers got quiet. Today, the towers are technically empty, though maintained. A few descendants still live nearby. One of them, an old woman named Salima, brews tea in a clay kettle shaped like a hedgehog and swears her grandfather once aimed a crossbow at a wedding party just to stay in practice. You climb the left-hand tower with her blessing. The stairwell winds tightly, the steps chipped from centuries of footfall. On the second floor, you find something unexpected, a mural painted directly onto the stone. It's crude but colorful. Two goats dancing under a full moon, surrounded by pine trees and stars. Beneath it, a line of text. May this be the last moon we argue under. Someone wanted peace, you say aloud. Aslan nods, but slowly. You know, cautiously. Fringe theorists love stories like this. They claim that the towers themselves absorb emotion, that stone can retain anger, laughter, grief. According to one, possibly drunk professor, Caucasus towers are emotional batteries. You charge them with drama, and eventually they either hum, crack, or spit ghosts. You're not sure about ghosts, but you do feel something up here. Not dread, not sadness, just a kind of tiredness. The kind that comes after holding a grudge too long. Like the walls are whispering, can we just stop now? Down below, Aslan plays a short tune on his flute. It's airy, off-key, but oddly beautiful. A child's melody, maybe. One of the local lullabies passed down through valleys where towers outnumber churches. The tune drifts into the gorge, and after a beat, echoes back. Not from your side, from the other tower. You stare, no one's there, and yet Aslan just shrugs. Sometimes the wind gets nostalgic. Here's your quirky tidbit. During peak feuding periods, some families trained ravens to carry messages or insults between towers. One account tells of a raven who returned with a small pouch of stones tied to its leg and a note reading, "You dropped these, maybe your brain too." Later that afternoon, you cross the bridge carefully and explore the second tower. This one smells faintly of beeswax and charcoal. There's a small alcove filled with dried herbs and a bowl of what looks like river pebbles. Memory stones, Aslan says, each one placed when someone died. No names, just weight. He taps one gently. This one? Probably from the cheese incident. By evening, you sit on a rock near the ravine as twilight creeps in. The towers loom above you, silent now. Their long war finally cooled into story. No more curses, no more crossbows, just shadows and stone, and two watchful windows forever facing each other, like grumpy siblings who forgot what they were fighting about, but still aren't ready to hug it out. You stand. The air has stilled. Not even a breeze. The wind's being polite, Aslan says. She doesn't like to interrupt old arguments. You smile, then begin the slow walk back. Morning comes with a quiet drizzle, the kind that makes the moss glow neon and turns dirt trails into polite suggestions. You're heading into lower altitudes today, toward a stretch of land where towers lean like tired philosophers and cell phone towers now share the ridgeline. This part, says your new guide, Levin, is where the towers tried to retire. You smile at the phrasing, but the sentiment is real. As you walk, the landscape softens. The cliffs are less vertical, the trees taller, the pathways smoother. There are signs of modern life now. Satellite dishes tacked to rooftops, faded Coca-Cola crates repurposed as flower beds, a moped leaning against a centuries-old tower like they're old drinking buddies. One tower has a blue tarp for a roof. Another has a solar panel bolted to its side with industrial-grade optimism. You arrive in a small village where a cluster of towers stands in loose formation around a school, a market stall, and a Soviet-era bus stop. The towers used to be the tallest things here, Levin says. Now they share the skyline with antennas. During Soviet rule, many of these towers were ignored, repurposed, or outright demolished. They were seen as relics, unproductive, sentimental, vaguely suspicious. In some places, towers were dismantled stone by stone to build administrative buildings. Others were abandoned when collectivization relocated families into lowland farms. One local tells you her grandfather refused to move out of his family's tower in the 1950s. They brought a form and a clipboard, she says. He brought out a shotgun and tea. They drank the tea, filed the form, and left. Heart. Levin explains that some towers became grain silos. Some were converted into tool sheds, and at least one was used as a secret radio station broadcasting bootleg Beatles. Fringe legend says that for a few weeks in 1967, a tower on the Chechen border was the region's most popular illegal disco until the goats rioted. Still, even as the world modernized, the towers refused to fully fade. They're like grandparents, one young woman says. You ignore them, but you always check to make sure they're still breathing. Here's your mainstream geography fact. During the post-Soviet years, many highland communities began reviving their traditional structures, not just towers, but clothing, recipes, and language. Restoration projects popped up in the 1990s and early 2000s, funded by local councils, NGOs, and diaspora donations. Some towers were rebuilt stone by stone. Others were stabilized just enough to not fall over on tourists. But not everyone wants the towers polished. They're supposed to lean, Levin mutters, patting a tower like it's an old horse. Straight ones are liars. You stop at one tower that now functions as a community center. Inside, kids are watching cartoons on a flat-screen TV while a grandmother slices bread with a knife older than any of them. The walls still bear arrow slits and faint carvings, though one now hosts a motivational poster. Respect your roots, but don't trip over them. You meet Tamari, a local teacher, an unofficial tower historian. She shows you a drawer filled with notebooks, each one handwritten by students who climbed to the tower's top and were told to write what they see. Some wrote about clouds, some about sheep. One wrote, "The stones are sad because we forgot how to talk to them." Tamari keeps that one on her wall. There's Wi-Fi here now, spotty but real. Some towers even have routers tucked into upper corners, powered by solar panels or generators. One teenager proudly shows you his TikTok account, which features a clip of him doing a handstand on the top ledge of a tower while traditional music plays in the background. It's called Tower Talk, he says. We have almost 300 followers. You scroll through his feed, dancing, sheep wrangling, drone footage, a brief and deeply concerning attempt to sled down a tower's roof with a plastic lid. You ask if he ever thinks the ancestors would be proud. He shrugs. We still live here, don't we? That seems to be the heart of it. The towers haven't disappeared. They've just adapted, slowly, uneasily, but they're still here, holding space, holding memory, and now holding Wi-Fi signals. As you pass a shop carved into the lower level of a tower, half souvenir stand, half apothecary, you see bundles of herbs hanging in rows. Chamomile, thyme, something that might be dried nettle. Levan says they're used in wind salves, mixtures rubbed on temples and cheekbones to calm the breath. Local tradition holds that when wind stops whispering, it means someone's breath has grown too loud. You buy a small pouch. Back outside, an elderly man sits beneath the shadow of his tower, playing a bowed string instrument that sounds halfway between a cello and a sigh. His dog naps beside him. His eyes are closed, but his fingers move with the confidence of someone playing for the mountain itself. Here's your fringe tidbit. There's a theory that each tower vibrates at a unique frequency, inaudible to human ears, but detectable by certain string instruments. Some musicians, like the man before you, try to match the tower's note. When they do, the music seems to bloom. If you ask the musicians, they'll just say, "When the tower sings back, you'll know." That evening, as the clouds stretch long and pink across the sky, you sit in the schoolyard with Levan. He tells you about the day lightning struck the tower his grandfather built. It split one wall and sent stones tumbling into a cow trough. No one was hurt. I asked my grandfather if the tower was angry, he says. He said no, just tired of pretending to be made of sky. And there it is again, the sense that the towers are alive, not in the fairy tale sense, with faces or footsteps, but in the deeper, heavier way that trees are alive. Quiet, watching, waiting. You look up. The towers stand in silhouette, softened by twilight, half wired, half ruined, wholly themselves. Not gone. Just learning how to live in a world that forgot to build things that last. By now, your boots are permanently crusted with the dust of 10 different centuries. Your phone's battery is clinging to life, and your notebook has swollen with so many names, legends, and odd diagrams that even you aren't sure what's fact and what's myth anymore. But the towers, they're still here, and so are the people, especially the young ones. Today, you're spending time with the new generation. In a hillside village where the towers sit like sun-bleached teeth along the ridge, you meet Dato and Mariam, both barely out of their teens, both utterly fluent in Instagram filters, satellite connectivity, and the precise mountain angles where the 4G signal doesn't glitch. They're part of a youth group called Tikari Dzala, which translates to stone strength. Their goal? Preserve their towers and their stories without turning their lives into a museum exhibit. We don't want to dress up like 13th century peasants and pose for tourists, Mariam says. We just want to live here and have people not forget why. She scrolls through her phone and shows you a recent video, a side-by-side montage of her grandmother baking kabizgini, cheese-stuffed flatbread, inside the family tower, and her cousin DJing from the same top floor during a regional live stream. It's been viewed 17,000 times. Mostly locals, Dato says, but also a few Americans who think we're faking it. You follow them to their family tower, one of the tallest in the valley, with a small wind turbine affixed like a cap. My uncle's idea, Dato says. He wanted to power the router so he could watch wrestling up here. You climb the narrow stairs and emerge into a top room filled with beanbags, books, a water tank, and a hand-painted sign that reads Tower of Chill. It's hard not to grin. The view is still jaw-dropping, but there's also a sense of comfort here, as if the tower is quietly pleased to be useful again. People think we're obsessed with the past, Mariam says, but we're actually building a future with it. Every week, the group records a podcast inside a different tower. The episodes are in a mix of Georgian, Svan, Russian, and occasionally English. Topics range from local weather patterns to ancestral ghost stories to who kissed who during the winter solstice dance. They've covered the history of tower architecture, the role of women in wind ceremonies, and once did a live episode during a thunderstorm, which nearly fried their microphones but went mildly viral. They call it stone airwaves. Here's your mainstream fact. Recent UNESCO cultural preservation efforts have funded training programs to teach traditional stone masonry techniques to local youth. This means Dato, who also happens to be studying engineering, can now fix a cracked lintel using the same methods his ancestors did, then live stream the process while joking about the time he accidentally sealed his brother into a grain cellar for 2 hours. Not that that actually happened, of course. Totally did, Dato mutters. You walk with them to another tower, this one badly damaged, with ivy curling through the window slits and half its eastern wall missing. It's a restoration project in progress, and their group is partnering with older stonemasons to bring it back. Some people say we should let it fall, Mariam says, that it's not useful anymore. She shrugs. But that's not the point. It doesn't have to do anything. It just has to be. Inside, they've already swept out the rubble, stabilized the floor, and installed motion lights powered by a solar panel. One wall is decorated with photos, grainy black and whites of distant ancestors in heavy wool cloaks, and bright color shots of the current youth group in hiking gear, paint-streaked, grinning wide. You recognize one of the symbols carved into the wall, the 7 dots in a circle you saw earlier in the listening one. Miriam notices your stare. "We found that here too," she says. "Nobody knows what it means, so we made it our logo." She hands you a pin, 7 small dots arranged in a circle. You pin it to your bag before you can even think about it. Fringe ideas thrive in this generation too. Only now they get better editing. Dato shows you a short animated video he made imagining that the towers were originally aligned to track celestial events. "I added drone shots and fake constellations," he says. "It's half nonsense, but people loved it. One guy sent us a theory that the towers form a Fibonacci spiral." He pauses. "We checked. They don't. But still cool," Miriam adds. "Almost." You attend one of their tower nights, a weekly gathering where villagers, young and old, meet inside one of the towers to share stories, songs, and local news. There's mulled wine, a fire basket, and someone passing around dumplings that have somehow survived a 4-hour hike in a Tupperware. A grandmother recites a wind poem from memory, pausing only once to glare at someone's ringtone. A boy sings a lullaby his grandfather taught him, forgetting the last verse and making up something about a goat and a falling star. The tower holds it all, past, present, maybe even future. You fall asleep later in a borrowed sleeping bag on the tower's 2nd floor. Someone has left a small speaker playing ambient field recordings, rain on slate roofs, footsteps on stone, the faint call of distant birds. But mostly, what you hear is breath, not your own, the tower's. A slow, stone-drawn inhale, then the softest exhale of silence. And you realize this generation doesn't need to be told how important the towers are. They've already climbed them. Now they're making sure the next wind knows where to land. The next valley is a quiet one. Fewer villages, fewer footpaths. The kind of place you wouldn't know existed unless someone told you. And most people don't. The towers here are different. Not gone, not broken. Just unfulfilled. Their walls rise a meter or two, then stop. Some are barely above ankle height, outlines in the grass. Others stand half-finished, still holding their original scaffolding stones. They're called the unbuilt towers. Your guide this morning is a woman named Isa, a stonemason's granddaughter and local historian who keeps everything important in her head and everything unimportant in her backpack. She leads you into the valley as the mist lifts off the ground like steam from a forgotten cup of tea. "This place is full of starts," she says, and pauses that never ended. There's a strange energy here, not haunted, but restless, like the landscape is full of unfinished sentences. You stop at one cluster of stone outlines and step over what would have been the threshold, just grass now, and silence. "Why didn't they finish?" you ask. She shrugs. Weather, feuds, plagues, broken hearts. Sometimes the stone just disagreed. The unbuilt towers have their own stories. Many passed down, others guessed at, and a few made up on the spot. One tale says a groom died the night before his wedding, and his family refused to finish the tower that was meant to be the couple's new home. Another tells of a builder who got halfway through before dreaming of the tower collapsing over and over again and never laid another stone. Scientists still argue whether these foundations were meant to become towers at all. Some say they were granaries, or ceremonial stages, or even livestock enclosures. But others believe they were genuinely tower projects, abandoned for reasons no record preserved. Stone doesn't leave diaries. Here's your quirky fact. In this valley, it's common to place a small offering on the first stone of a new tower build, a copper coin, a sprig of wormwood, a handful of salt. Locals say the stone must be woken up before it agrees to be part of a tower. If you skip the ritual, the tower might refuse to rise, or worse, collapse. Isa crouches near one such stone. This one never woke, she says, brushing away moss. See how it tilts? That's how you know. She pulls a lump of wax from her bag and presses it against the stone's surface, capturing its faint carvings. Later, she'll compare it with other foundation marks to see if it belonged to a known family or a lost clan. Weird detail. Some unfinished towers contain symbols found nowhere else. One partial build has stones marked with concentric hexagons, unusual in this region. Another features spiral carvings running counterclockwise, opposite the usual direction. A fringe theory suggests these were experimental towers designed to capture reverse wind or channel dreams. The mainstream opinion? Someone got creative or confused. You hike farther up the ridge to a partially built tower that still stands 4 stories high. Just no roof, no staircases, and no windows. A stone skeleton. The base is solid, the corners perfectly squared, and yet it was never completed. Isa says no one knows why. No written records, no oral stories, just silence. The locals call it the paused one. Inside, the acoustics are eerie. You say a word and it bounces back too fast, like the tower is trying to interrupt. You stand in the center of the space where the hearth would have been and imagine smoke rising, bread baking, a child laughing. None of it ever happened. And yet, it doesn't feel like a failure, more like a promise no one got around to keeping. Outside, a line of half-carved stones rests beside a long-forgotten scaffold. One still bears the grooves of a mason's chisel. Isa touches it with care. That was my grandfather's, she says. He was going to finish this tower with his cousin, but then the cousin joined the border patrol. Then came the illness, then she trails off. The stones waited, but we didn't come back. In some communities, there's a tradition of visiting unbuilt towers once a year, often on a particular moon phase. Families bring bread, wine, and small candles. They leave the food, light the candles, and walk away in silence. It's not mourning, it's recognition. Even the unfinished deserve memory, Isa says, maybe especially them. You rest beside one of the lower foundations. The grass has grown thick here, studded with yellow wildflowers and a single, very disinterested turtle. The view is wide, rolling hills, layered peaks, a distant ribbon of mist curling down a river bend. It would have been a perfect place for a tower. And maybe it still is. Some locals believe unfinished towers can be restarted, that if a stone is turned over 3 times under a full moon and a child touches the foundation first, the tower will allow itself to rise. Whether this is ritual, play, or pure poetic instinct doesn't matter. The important thing is that the idea survives. Isa leads you back down toward the village, stopping occasionally to point out barely visible foundation lines in the grass. You realize this valley might hold dozens of almost towers, hundreds even, like freckles across the land. You can't visit all of them, she says, but they know you came. That night, as you sit by the hearth in Isa's family home, one of the oldest intact towers in the region, she pulls out a small stone from her coat pocket. It's roughly chiseled, palm-sized, with a notch on one edge. It's from a tower that was never built, she says, but I think it's waiting. She places it on her windowsill, facing the wind. It doesn't whisper, but it doesn't leave. This morning begins with the smell of ash and lichen. You're in a remote cluster of hilltop settlements now, where the valleys drop steeply and the towers seem fewer, but sturdier. The air is crisp, and the sky has that washed-out silver that only happens when the clouds are thinking things over. Today, you're going to meet the last of the master tower builders. You climb toward a house with a sloping slate roof and carved wooden shutters painted dark blue. Outside sits a man named Vaca. He's somewhere between 60 and infinity, wrapped in a sheepskin coat that makes him look like part of the landscape. He nods at you once, offers a cup of strong mountain tea, and gestures toward a long, cloth-covered bundle beside him. Without a word, he unwraps it. It's his toolkit: 6 chisels, 3 hammers, 1 spirit level with a cracked glass vial, and a trowel with a handle so worn it shines like obsidian. Each has a name, he says softly. You do not name a tool unless it teaches you something. Veka is what's known locally as a Karadarg, or one who wakes the stone. There are only a few left, fewer still, who are willing or able to pass the knowledge on. Too slow, he says. People want fast now. Steel and cement. My towers grow like trees. Theirs are microwave popcorn. He's agreed to show you how it's done. Not a full tower, of course, but a section, a symbolic wall meant to demonstrate the process. The foundation stone must be selected, not just for size and shape, but attitude. Veka taps each stone with the handle of his chisel. Some get passed over. Others are lifted, grunted at, and arranged into an L-shaped curve in the ground. It takes him 30 minutes to find 3. He begins without fanfare. Stone, chisel, tap, adjust, repeat. The sound is oddly meditative, rhythmic without being regular, sharp but not aggressive. You watch as the first layer begins to take shape, each piece fitting snugly into the others, without visible mortar. We use the mountain's breath, he says, pointing to a small satchel of dry dust and crushed lime. Not glue, just memory. Here's your mainstream fact. Traditional Caucasian tower building relied on dry stacking techniques in the lower sections, where weight alone could hold the structure together, with lime or mud mortar added higher up to absorb wind sway and seasonal shifting. Each cornerstone was slightly beveled to encourage water runoff and minimize frost cracking. Ingenious, time-consuming, and vanishing. Vaca's son, mid-30s, university-educated, fluent in 3 languages, joins the build after lunch. His name is Asker. He's one of the few younger locals actively training in the craft. My friends think I'm wasting my education, he admits, but I think they're wasting their inheritance. Together, father and son shape another 3 layers before the sun begins to fade behind the ridgeline. The wall isn't tall, maybe up to your chest, but already it feels anchored, permanent. You touch one of the stones and feel its faint warmth from the day. It doesn't give anything away, but it doesn't reject you either. Vaca shares a fringe detail as you rest. Some old builders believed that if a tower was finished without a final prayer, or worse, during a family dispute, it would never sleep properly. Locals describe these towers as hungry, prone to cracking, strange sounds, and a restless wind that wouldn't leave their walls. We don't build during an argument, Vaca says. We wait until the silence is kind. You walk to a nearby completed tower he built years ago. It stands alone, its stone flawless, its silhouette sharp against the dusk. He doesn't touch it, but he stands beside it like he would an old friend. I built this one after my brother died, he says. Every stone was set with one memory. You ask if he ever talks to the towers. All the time, he says, but only after dark. Asker adds, he also hums to them, claims it keeps the walls calm. You glance at Vaca. He doesn't deny it. The inside of the tower is spare. A few wooden shelves, a braided rope hanging from a beam. On the far wall, a message in chalk. I built this so you could rest. Asker says his father wrote that the day they placed the final capstone. Here's your quirky tidbit. Among tower builders, there's a ritual involving the capstone. On the final day of a build, they place a coin and a drop of honey beneath the last stone. For sweetness, Vaca explains. So, the tower remembers kindness, not labor. Back outside, the three of you sit in silence for a while, watching night settle in like a slow fog. The wind picks up. Nothing fierce, just enough to brush your collar and rustle the grass. You hear it sigh around the tower's edges and catch in the eaves like a tired breath. Vaca listens for a moment, then smiles. She likes it. The next morning, you help carry the tools back down the ridge. The work is slow, methodical, unglamorous, and entirely absorbing. There's something deeply grounding about shaping stone with your hands. Asker says he sometimes goes days without speaking when he's working. There's no room for distraction. Each crack matters. Each silence, too. You ask if they'll build another full tower someday. We might, Vaca says, if someone needs it. And there it is, that understanding that towers weren't built for aesthetics or legacy, but for people, for shelter, for wind, for memory, for sleep. At the edge of the trail, Vaca stops, picks up a small piece of chipped limestone, and hands it to you. Keep it, he says. That stone wanted to be part of something. And now, maybe it is. By now, you know how the wind sounds when it's playful, when it's tired, when it's testing your patience. But today, it's still, utterly still. No breeze to lift your collar, no whistle through tower slits. Just the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for a decision. You've come to the last ridge. One final rise above a series of grassy terraces, overlooking everything you've walked through these past days. Folded valleys, stone silhouettes, rivers cutting slow silver lines through mossy ridges. This final tower is known as Karshali, the Last Watcher. It's not the oldest, not the tallest, but it has a reputation for being the quietest. Not because no one speaks here, but because even the wind knows when to hush. Your guide for this final walk is no one. You're alone. Not because no one could come, but because sometimes these last steps are best taken without translation. Karshali stands clean and square, set slightly apart from the ruins and roads. It has no visible damage. Its corners are sharp, its windows open, not broken. You approach slowly, the grass crunching softly underfoot. A simple wooden ladder leads to the second level. Inside, there is no furniture, just sunlight slanting through the slits. The air holds the faint smell of old wood, time, and something like warm stone. You sit on the floor, no one speaks, because there's no one to. The wind doesn't come, not a whisper, not even a breath. And yet, the tower doesn't feel empty. It feels complete. This is the place where people say the towers stop watching and begin remembering, where you don't hear voices in the wind anymore because the wind has heard enough. You think back to everything, to the mist-wrapped valleys, the spiral-carved stones, the towers that hummed and the ones that moaned, the laughing teenagers live-streaming goat videos, the grieving masons placing honey under capstones, the feuds, the songs, the towers that never got their final layer. They all brought you here. Here's your mainstream detail. Many of the oldest towers in the Caucasus aren't marked on modern maps. Some aren't even visible from satellite images. Overgrown, sunk, or simply erased by time. Which means that somewhere out there, still, are towers no one remembers. No coordinates, no names. And yet sometimes a shepherd finds one, or a child playing on a hill hears a strange echo. And suddenly, a story returns. Karshali has no symbols on its walls, no initials, no dated inscriptions, just a small circular stone at the very top of the tower, embedded like a pupil in a giant unblinking eye. One scholar once climbed up and touched it. He said it was warm, even though the air was freezing. He never explained it. Maybe the tower remembered him, someone later said. Or maybe he just needed something to believe in. You climb the final steps and emerge onto the roof. From here, the world is silence. You can see the tower lines, some standing, some broken, some only visible as shadows in the grass. You trace them like constellations, one by one, tower by tower. The wind finally arrives. Not a gust, just a breath, a soft exhale. And in that single breath, you hear nothing. No song, no whisper, just peace. Now slow your breathing. The stone under your body is warm from sunlight, cooling now as the last threads of day stretch and dissolve across the horizon. Let yourself lean back. The tower holds you. It's held generations. You're not the first to sit here, watching stars blink into life like distant windows opening across the sky. And you won't be the last. The wind curls past once more, not cold, not urgent, just present. You feel it touch your cheek, like an old friend letting go of your sleeve. The towers don't hum now. They don't shift. They rest. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the dark, the towers are breathing, and the wind finally sleeps.